Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. This time we're tackling architectural design.
Yeah, we're really going beyond just, pretty pictures.
Yeah.
We're diving into some serious analysis and critique.
Absolutely. And the image we're looking at is, it's pretty striking.
It is.
Kind of stark, almost.
Yeah.
Imagine like this passageway, almost like a tunnel.
Yeah.
With this huge concrete canopy overhead, and it's leading to this courtyard, bathed in sunlight with a single tree.
Very minimalist.
Yeah, minimalist is a good word for it.
Yeah.
And what's really cool is our source material actually gives us both.
Right.
Like a straight description of the design AD,
Yeah.
then this really thoughtful critique.
Yeah, it's really interesting when we get both sides of the coin here.
Yeah, it's like we've got this secret architect whispering in our ear, giving us the inside scoop.
Exactly.
So let's jump right in. And I think the first thing that grabs you is the concrete.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we're talking serious concrete here.
We are.
This isn't your average sidewalk or, parking garage material.
This is not your suburban driveway situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So tell me about this concrete. What are they doing here?
Well, the analysis points out how the raw texture of the concrete really plays into that whole minimalist aesthetic.
Oh, interesting.
It's got this sense of permanence, right?
Yeah.
Of weightiness, which kind of ties into this particular style.
It's like they're making a statement with the material itself.
Exactly.
It's not just about structure. It's about conveying a feeling.
Right.
But concrete can be tricky too, right?
Oh.
I mean, it can feel cold.
Oh, absolutely.
Even a little imposing if it's not handled carefully.
Yeah, and the source material actually brings that up as a potential downside.
Really?
They talk about this inherent coldness concrete has, almost a gloominess, if it's not balanced with really clever lighting solutions.
Oh, that's
So
interesting.
yeah, that's a key consideration here.
And speaking of lighting, that's where this design gets really exciting.
Oh yeah, the lighting is amazing.
The way they play with light and shadow is just incredible.
Yeah, it's so dynamic.
You've got these gaps in the canopy, and they create these patterns of light. And it's constantly changing throughout the day. It's like a living artwork.
Absolutely. And the source really highlights that they talk about how the interplay of light and shadow
Yeah.
adds a whole other dimension to the space.
Right.
It's not static. It's constantly evolving, which impacts how you experience the space at different times of day.
I'm imagining like early morning with the sun low in the sky,
Right.
casting these long shadows, and then as the day progresses,
Yeah,
the whole mood of the space shifts.
totally. And that's something you wouldn't get with a, traditional roof or a solid canopy.
It reminds me of those grand cathedrals,
Oh, yeah.
where shafts of sunlight come through the stained glass,
Right.
creating this ethereal glow.
Exactly.
Here it's sunlight and concrete, but the effect is just as dramatic.
Yeah, it's playing with that same idea of using light to create a sense of awe.
Yeah, and maybe even a little bit of mystery, right?
Absolutely.
Like you're not quite sure what's around the next bend,
Yeah, and you're drawn further into the space
drawn in by the light.
by the light and the shadows, yeah.
And, speaking of being drawn in, let's talk about scale for a second.
Oh, yeah. The scale is crucial here.
Imagine walking through this passageway. It's narrow. You've got this massive ceiling overhead.
It's imposing.
How do you think that would feel?
Well, the source actually uses this term compression and release
Oh, interesting.
to describe that feeling of moving from this compressed, narrow passageway
Uh-huh.
into the expansive courtyard. It's a classic architectural technique to heighten that sense of arrival.
Oh, I see. So you feel this kind of pressure almost
Right.
as you're moving through the passageway, and then suddenly you're released into this open space.
Exactly. And it makes that open space feel even grander.
It's like that moment when you step out of a dark tunnel
Right.
and you're blinded by the sunlight and the vastness of the landscape.
Yeah, you get that instant feeling of awe and relief.
Wow, that's a powerful image.
It is, and the source really emphasizes how this design plays with that concept.
But they also raise a really interesting question. They ask whether that initial compression
Yeah.
goes too far. Like, would it feel more confining than awe-inspiring?
That's a great point. It's a delicate balance.
It is.
They suggest that even just slightly widening the passageway could shift the whole experience.
It's like they're walking this tightrope between grandeur and claustrophobia.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have that solitary tree at the end of the tunnel.
Oh, yeah, that tree is fascinating.
It's like a beacon in the distance.
It is.
Almost a symbol of hope.
And the analysis talks about how that single tree is meant to be a focal point. right? It's symbolizing this connection to nature,
Right.
which is a huge trend in contemporary architecture, bringing nature into these urban spaces.
Yeah, even if it's just a small gesture like a single tree.
Exactly.
But it does make you wonder, is one tree really enough?
That's a good question.
It feels a bit lonely out there all by itself.
It does a bit isolated.
What if they incorporated more greenery within the passageway itself?
Oh, that's an interesting thought.
Do you think that would create a stronger connection to nature?
Potentially. Yeah. The analysis actually hints at this idea.
Really?
They suggest that adding greenery to the passageway could enhance the whole experience.
Oh, I like that.
It's all about finding that right balance between the starkness of the concrete and the vibrancy of nature.
Imagine like vines trailing down the walls.
Oh, yeah.
Or pockets of green bursting through the concrete.
That would be beautiful.
It would soften the harshness and just add this touch of life.
And it would create this sense of blurring the lines between inside and outside, between the built environment and the natural world.
I love that, blurring the lines.
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept.
And speaking of blurring lines, this design seems to straddle a line between being purely aesthetic and actually being functional.
Yeah.
It's undeniably stunning to look at.
It is.
But could you actually do anything in this space?
That's a really crucial question.
It is.
And one that the source material really grapples with as well.
So they're acknowledging that there might be some limitations.
Exactly.
When it comes to functionality.
Right.
I mean, it's not exactly a space where you picture having a picnic or, a casual gathering.
It doesn't exactly scream family barbecue.
No, it doesn't.
It's almost too monumental for everyday activities.
Right.
Unless, of course, that monumentality is the intended effect.
Oh, interesting.
Maybe the architect envisioned this space as more of a contemplative experience, almost spiritual rather than purely functional.
Okay, so we're talking about a space for reflection.
Yeah.
For quiet contemplation. Not for, rowdy parties or anything like that.
Exactly. And that's something we can definitely explore further as we dig deeper into the analysis.
All right, well, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll delve deeper into the potential functions of this space and how those functions might influence or even be influenced by the overall design.
Sounds good. I'm ready to keep digging.
Me too.
All right.
We'll be right back.
And that brings us right back to that question of, functionality.
Yeah.
How would this space actually work for gatherings?
Right, because we were talking about, is this a place for contemplation or is this a place for,
right.
parties?
Exactly.
So what do they say about that?
Well, the source material does bring up some concerns about practicality.
Okay.
Especially when it comes to, larger groups of people. They specifically talk about the acoustics.
Oh, yeah, the acoustics.
All that concrete,
I can imagine it being a bit echoey in there.
Yeah, concrete's not exactly known for its sound absorption.
Oh, really?
They actually used the word cacophony at one point.
Oh, wow.
Imagining, a lot of people trying to have conversations.
Yeah, it'd be like trying to talk in a giant echo chamber. Right.
Not exactly conducive to, a relaxed gathering.
No, not really.
So what do they suggest? How do you fix that?
Well, they talk about incorporating sound-absorbing materials.
Okay.
Or maybe strategically placed acoustic panels.
I see. So you could kind of muffle the sound a bit.
Right, break it up.
Without, compromising the design.
Exactly.
Wow. It's amazing how much thought goes into creating a space like this.
It really is.
It's like a giant puzzle.
It is.
You have to think about all these different elements and how they all work together.
And how they impact the people who are actually going to be using the space.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of puzzles,
yeah.
How did they even build this thing? That canopy looks massive.
It is massive.
How do you even construct something like that?
Well, the source material mentions modular construction.
Okay, modular construction. So is that like building with giant Legos?
That's a simplified way to think about it.
Yeah.
But it does capture the basic idea.
Essentially, the canopy is made up of these smaller prefabricated units that are then assembled on site.
So they're not pouring all that concrete in place.
No, they're creating these modules off site.
Right.
And then bringing them in and putting them together like a giant jigsaw puzzle.
Wow. That must take some serious engineering.
Oh, absolutely.
To make sure those pieces fit together perfectly.
Precision is key here.
And not to mention, the weight of those concrete modules.
Yeah. You don't want any structural issues.
No, definitely not.
The analysis actually highlights that, there's very little room for error when you're dealing with components of that size.
The end result looks so seamless.
It does.
It's like those concrete blocks are just floating in midair.
That's the beauty of good design, right?
Yeah.
It conceals all the complexity and allows you to just experience the space.
But modular construction isn't without its downsides, is it?
Well, it does have some limitations.
Like what?
Flexibility, for one. Once those modules are locked in place, making changes or modifications can be really tricky.
So, like if they decided they wanted to add a skylight or something.
Yeah, or change the configuration of the canopy.
It wouldn't be a simple task?
No, it would be a major undertaking.
So it's a trade-off.
Exactly.
You gain efficiency and a certain aesthetic with modular construction, but you lose some adaptability in the process. Okay, let's zoom out a bit and talk about the overall architectural style of this design.
Sure.
I mean, it's definitely modern.
Oh, yeah, very contemporary.
But there's also something kind of raw and powerful about it.
Right.
What would you call that?
Well, the source material actually identifies several influences.
Okay.
They mention modernism, of course.
Right, with the clean lines and the honest use of materials.
Exactly. But there are also clear elements of brutalism.
Brutalism, that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
I always think of those big, imposing government buildings from like the mid-20th century.
Right. Lots of concrete.
Yeah. But this design feels a bit more refined. It does.
Less overtly aggressive.
Yeah, it's not pure brutalism.
Okay.
It's more of a contemporary interpretation.
I see.
Blending that rawness of concrete with a more nuanced approach to light and shadow.
So like a softer brutalism.
You could say that, yeah.
And the source also mentions influences from Japanese and Scandinavian architecture.
You do.
Which is interesting.
It is.
Because those styles are often associated with simplicity and natural light.
Right, and that meditative quality.
Right, do we see in this design too?
Exactly.
It's like they've taken all these different influences and blended them together to create something unique.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this design so fascinating.
It's like a fusion cuisine of architectural styles.
I like that analogy.
So we've talked about the concrete, the light, the scale, the style, but what about the function?
Right back to functionality.
We were discussing the acoustics earlier.
Yeah.
But what about lighting? Natural light is great, but it's not always reliable.
That's true. Especially in a space like this. Yeah, you got that heavy canopy overhead.
Right.
Blocking out a lot of the natural light.
And the passageway is quite narrow as well.
So what do they say about that in the analysis?
Well, they do mention the need for flexible lighting solutions
Okay.
to supplement that natural light.
Makes sense.
They suggest incorporating artificial lighting that can be adjusted.
No, that's smart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you could create different moods depending on the time of day
Right.
or the specific use of the space.
So like if they wanted to use this space for an evening event, they would need to add some strategically placed lights.
Exactly.
To illuminate the passageway and the courtyard.
And they would need to think about the type of lighting, the color temperature, how it interacts with those concrete surfaces.
Right, because you don't want the light to clash with the material.
Exactly.
It's all about creating the right ambiance.
It is.
It's like setting the stage for a performance.
That's a great analogy.
Using light to create different moods and highlight specific features.
Exactly. And it shows how light can be a design element in its own right.
Right. Not just a functional necessity.
Exactly.
Okay. So we've talked about a lot of different aspects of this design.
We have.
But let's get down to brass tacks here.
Okay.
Who is this space actually for?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
The source material really grapples with this tension between form and function.
Right. Because it's a beautiful space.
Oh, it is undeniably beautiful.
But is it functional?
Well, they acknowledge that it might not lend itself to all types of activities.
It's not exactly a multi-purpose space.
Maybe not in a traditional sense.
So what is it then?
Well, maybe that's the point.
Yeah.
Maybe the architect envisioned this space as a place for contemplation, for quiet reflection.
Right.
A moment of pause amidst the chaos of urban life.
Like a modern-day sanctuary.
You could say that.
A place to escape the noise and the crowds.
Exactly.
And just be present in the moment.
And if that was the intention, then perhaps the limitations in terms of functionality are actually part of the design.
It's like they're saying, this is not a space for parties.
Right.
This is a space for stillness.
For introspection.
For connecting with yourself.
Precisely. And that brings us to a really important point.
Okay.
The subjectivity of design.
Oh, yeah. What one person finds inspiring.
Right.
another might find restrictive.
Exactly. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
It's all a matter of perspective.
Exactly. And the source material acknowledges this.
They do.
They suggest that incorporating warmer materials or softer textures could broaden the appeal of the design.
I see.
Without compromising its architectural integrity.
So like adding a touch of softness to balance out the starkness of the concrete.
Exactly. It's all about finding that sweet spot.
Right.
That balance between making a bold statement and creating a space that feels inviting and engaging.
So it's not just about the architect's vision.
Right.
It's about how people actually experience the space.
Exactly. And that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle.
Okay. The people who will actually inhabit this space.
How would they experience it?
Yeah, what emotions would it evoke?
Because ultimately, the success of any design hinges on its ability to connect with people on an emotional level.
It's not just about the physical structure.
Right.
It's about how that structure makes you feel.
Precisely. And this design with its stark beauty, its play of light and shadow, its monumental scale.
It's definitely got presence.
It does.
It commands your attention.
It does. And it has the potential to evoke a wide range of emotions.
From awe and wonder to maybe a sense of being dwarfed or even slightly claustrophobic.
Exactly. It's a space that makes you think and feel.
And that's what makes it so fascinating, right?
It is.
It's a design that challenges our preconceived notions of what architecture should be.
It pushes boundaries.
It forces us to confront our own emotional responses.
To the built environment.
To the spaces we inhabit.
And that's what makes this deep dive so intriguing. It's not just about analyzing a design.
Right.
It's about exploring the deeper meaning behind it.
And the impact it has on us as human beings.
Exactly. And that's something we can all relate to.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's take another quick break.
Okay.
And when we come back, we'll wrap up our discussion and offer some final thoughts on this thought-provoking design.
Sounds good. I'm ready to synthesize all these ideas.
Me too.
Yeah.
All right, we'll be right back. So we've really covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We've talked about the materials, the light, the scale, the style, the function, even the psychology of space.
It's been a comprehensive analysis.
It has. And I have to say, I'm really impressed with this design.
Me too.
It's bold. It's thought-provoking.
It's definitely a statement piece.
It is. And it's clear that the architect put a lot of thought into every detail.
Absolutely.
But what stands out to you as the most intriguing aspect?
You know, for me, it's that constant tension between the boldness of the aesthetic and the need for functionality.
Right, because it's beautiful.
Oh, it is.
But is it usable?
Exactly. And I think that's a question that every architect grapples with.
It's like a fundamental challenge of design.
It is.
How do you create a space that is both visually stunning and practical?
Right. And I think this design really highlights that dilemma.
It does. And it makes me wonder, if you were the architect,
yeah,
what one thing would you change about this space to enhance the overall experience?
Oh, that's a tough one.
It is.
But if I had to pick just one thing,
yeah,
I'd focus on amplifying that connection to nature.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more.
So we talked about that solitary tree in the courtyard.
Kind of lonely out there.
It is a bit isolated.
Yeah.
What if instead of just that one tree, the concrete walls themselves were interwoven with greenery?
Oh, wow. I love that idea.
Yeah. Imagine like climbing vines.
Yeah.
Pockets of moss. Maybe even a small water feature trickling down the side.
It would be like bringing the courtyard into the passageway.
Exactly. You'd still have that stark beauty of the concrete.
Right.
But with this added layer of life and softness.
And it wouldn't just be seeing nature at a distance. You'd be walking through it.
Exactly. It would become a more multi-sensory experience.
Oh, I like that.
Engaging not just your sight, but your sense of touch, sound, even smell.
And that transition from the passageway to the courtyard would be even more dramatic.
It would be like emerging from a lush green oasis.
Into this bright open space.
Exactly. A truly breathtaking experience.
Wow, you've really given me something to think about here.
I'm glad.
It's amazing how a small change like that could have such a big impact on the overall feel of the space.
It's all about those subtle details.
And it just goes to show how powerful design can be.
It is.
It's not just about aesthetics.
Right.
It's about creating an experience.
Exactly.
An experience that engages all of our senses.
And evokes emotions.
Exactly. Well, on that note, I think we've come to the end of our deep dive.
I think so too.
We've explored this fascinating concrete creation from every angle.
We have.
And I hope our listeners are feeling inspired to look at the spaces around them with fresh eyes.
Absolutely.
Because architecture's all around us.
It is.
And it has the power to shape our lives in ways we may not even realize.
And that's worth thinking about.
It is so. Until next time, keep those design minds engaged.
And keep exploring the world around you.
Thanks for joining us.